Your hair smells nice. This happened to me a few years ago when I was on a trip in Malaysia with my school. To keep it brief, the trip was a learning experience for 2 weeks, and in these 2 weeks, we had the weekends off, which were spent in Kuala Lumpur. The first weekend was relatively uneventful, except for one of the girls, Claire, got very sick and couldn't leave the hotel. This is necessary information, but the encounter happened in our final weekend in Kuala Lumpur. As Claire was sick, a teacher needed to stay back at the hotel, so Miss Han stayed back with her, as did Claire's best friend. At this point, I like to point out, there were 3 teachers, and on our weekends off, one teacher was always staying at the hotel to work on assignments for her PhD. So it ended up just being Mr. Lubin and the other 7 students, myself included, going into Chinatown. We took a cab, though it was more of a minibus, I guess, to the street, and we were all told to go our separate ways. I split off with my friend Jess. Everybody else split off in pairs too. We all spread out in different directions, and I couldn't tell you where everyone else went for the life of me. Jess and I went to a makeup stall. She's a massive makeup fanatic, and even though it was all fake, I think she just wanted to say she owned MAC and all that. I'm not a big makeup fan. I'm quite a plain girl and never really took an interest in makeup, so I just stood out of the stall and watched Jess as she looked around. Eventually, Jess ended up talking to the guy at the stall, and I became very aware of somebody standing behind me. The guy was standing a distance away, so I wasn't too concerned until it reached that point where he hadn't moved, and Jess came back to me. And I still didn't think much of it, so I didn't mention anything and we kept walking. Now I was getting concerned. Jess was getting distracted by the stalls and was being very easily pulled in by the salespeople. As I kept walking at a pace she could easily catch up to, but when she looked away to talk to a man about a handbag, I could feel the man's nose in my hair. I sped up and put some distance between us, but I heard him inhale deeply, like he was going to suck my hair up through his nose. Then he said it, and it made my blood run cold. Your hair smells nice. Now, I didn't want to stop walking and have him grab me or something like that, so I kept walking and Jess was walking somewhat behind me. Myself and this guy now had some distance between us. I found myself with my phone in my hand. I couldn't make calls or anything, as I didn't have a local SIM card, but I decided to pretend to be on the phone to Mr. Lubin to see if that might scare the guy off. Instead of scaring him, this guy sped up and whispered right into my ear, "You're very beautiful, come look at my store." His accent was very strong, his breath was warm, and smelt of fish. I remember I shuddered and quickened my pace again. Given up on the phone idea. By now, I think Jess had realized this guy was following me, because Mr. Lubin showed up at the end of the stretch of stalls. He quickly rushed over to me and ushered me away, but the guy still spoke. "Maybe next time, baby," he had said and walked off. Mr. Lubin quickly called the others, and we all walked back to the hotel from Chinatown. He didn't say anything about the event, even when I asked. So when we got back to the hotel, I asked Jess what she saw. She said she could have sworn it was the cab driver. If you travel overseas, make sure your cab driver isn't a creep. The field trip stalker. Hello guys, I've recently discovered this thread and have decided to tell you about a creepy event that's happened to me not too long ago. So before I start, let me tell you a little bit about myself and give you some backstory. I'm a 15-year-old straight male. I live in Germany, but I come from a small European country. This event had happened before my removal to Germany. In my country, we have field trips, usually at the end of 8th grade, that last for about a week or so. Now, I've had my fair share of stalkers, but nothing like this. It was September in 2014, and I went to a field trip to an island with my class. I was 14 at the time. There was this girl, Jane. Jane used to be a normal girl up until that point. She was always really kind of shy and really kept to herself, but everyone liked her. She was never bullied or anything like that, just a normal shy girl. We used to chat on Facebook a little bit, but nothing serious. I never really harbored any feelings towards her, neither in her favor nor against her. So back to the field trip. I smoked a couple of cigarettes with my mates in our hotel room, and then we went outside. The teacher wanted us to show some plants that were specific for that area. Now I've noticed that Jane was talking to me more often than before, and she was walking very near me, but I thought that was merely a coincidence. I didn't make a fuss about it. But as time went by, the things had started to get worse. She started touching me, hugging me, and following me respectively. On the third day, we went on a cruise to a nearby island, and during the cruise, she was sitting next to me. She had a camera and was taking pictures of me. I had zero sense of restraint at that point, since I was young and didn't think much of it. I noticed that she was taking a suspicious amount of photos, mostly of me, and I told her to calm down. Then she talked to me for an hour, but she didn't say anything interesting. She was mimicking the Irish and British accents to me, and basically blabbering stuff for approximately an hour. I was just smiling and replying with, "That's nice." In the following days, she had started to hug me and made me feel uncomfortable, so one day I came to her and told her that we needed to talk in private. We went to the woods, and I asked her if she was in love with me. She denied and kept saying that there had been a misunderstanding, but I knew something was off about her. Then she told me her life story. She said that her mother is a schizophrenic and that she's severely depressed about it. I felt sorry for her, but I told her that the touching was inappropriate. During our conversation, my mates wondered where I am and organized a search party for me. They found us eventually, but she had decided to stay behind and let me go. I had no idea what she was doing after I left. On one occasion, she came into our hotel room asking for water, as if there wasn't any water in her own room. However, when she got the requested water, she refused to leave the room. We got rid of her by telling her that we're going out to have some fun. The next day, the harassing got even worse. She would follow me around and hug me again. The peak of her abnormal behavior happened in the evening. I took a walk with a friend of mine and turned around briefly only to see her behind us. She was following us, and I kid you not, I never felt this kind of dread in my whole life. We made our way down the shore and hid behind a big rock next to a police station. "We should go inside and tell the police we have a stalker," my friend joked. Anyway, she couldn't find us and gave up finally. My best friend heard the story and went to her room to tell her to fuck off. I was infuriated with him because it was rude of him, regardless of her actions. I'm usually not meek, but I thought that was horrible. Now I see that, no matter how cruel that was, it was the right thing to do. I went to her room and apologized for my friend's actions. She was in her bed sobbing uncontrollably, and I calmed her down and went outside. A female friend of mine, Sarah, had invited me to come to her room so we could discuss something. I made my way to her room and saw two other girls there. We sat on the chairs in her balcony, and she had told me that Jane is a very, very depressed person who had done some self-harming in the past. I was shocked when I heard that. So, amidst our conversation, I winced. I raised my look and saw Jane, maybe 50 meters away, just sitting on a rock, listening to music and staring at me. She had a solemn look in her eyes. I suddenly felt dismay and told my friends that we have a spectator. They winced too, and we decided to pry on her a little bit before backing out to the bedroom. "Just stay away from her," was the last thing Sarah told me before I left. To my luck, it was the end of our field trip and I finally got some rest. Weird encounters with her became fewer and fewer because she was often absent from school. Later I found out that she had overdosed on sleeping pills a couple times, but survived all of them. There was even a rumor that she had ended up in a psychiatric institution, but I have no proof of that, so I can't tell you that correctly. Anyways, the point of this story is that sometimes you have to be rude so you can prevent something like this happening to you. It may seem cruel or might even hurt the other person, but in the end, it's your life, and you have to stand up for yourself and make sure you're happy. My encounter on a Hare Krishna farm. I graduated high school almost a year ago. I had really no urge to attend college or the military, and basically got stuck in my boring hometown for months, where I slowly became dependent on Xanax and booze, and was destined to repeat the cycle of white trash set before me by my parents and theirs before me. I knew I had to leave town, so I decided to sign up for a website you may have heard of called wwoof.com, Worldwide Opportunities for Organic Farming. You pay a small fee, and they make available a directory of organic farming operations that'll feed you and allow you to live with them in return for a certain amount of work around the farm. The place I decided to commit to was a Hare Krishna community in the Deep South. I got there and my car almost immediately broke down. It was a 30-year-old Chevy Blazer I bought on Craigslist for $500. Later on, I was to find out it was beyond repair at this point. The closest town was almost 20 miles away, so I found myself stranded and surrounded by the most unbearable hipsters. To be more specific, I'd say about a third of the population of the community were either first or second generation Indian immigrants living near the temple for religious reasons. Another demographic were aging hippies also there for spiritual purposes, but also running the small-scale organic farm located on the property. Everyone else, however, self-absorbed, condescending, right out of college but vapid as shit hipsters. I basically kept to myself, but occasionally was forced into conversations about vibrating crystals and their 3-year spiritual journey, no doubt, being funded by their parents. I'd been there for weeks and was desperate for a real conversation, and then Michael showed up. I had heard stories about Michael. A couple days before I showed up, he had left to retrieve an impounded car in a large city about an hour away. Everyone said he was lazy, insane, and would spend hours up in his room doing yoga instead of coming down and working with the rest of us. He showed up late in the evening, going on about how he was going to really get involved with the farming and throw himself into the consciousness of this. He was in his early 30s. He looked like a balding Hasidic Jew, his unwashed sideburns curled. He spoke like a stoner cartoon character. His sentences punctuated with and like, given his utterly fried brain time to figure out what others wanted to hear. He reminded me of the many friends I had left back home. We became fast friends, as he was the only person there who didn't give me the urge to bite my fingers off when he spoke. We were both from Texas, so he talked about the loony conservative teachers we had in high school, football, and of course, drugs. Every now and then, he brought up subjects that really sort of threw me off. He wasn't able to get his car out of the impound garage, so he schemed the best way to break it out. These plans involved firearms, pipe bombs, and telepathy. He told me he'd come to the Hare Krishna temple to befriend some of the gurus and learn some sort of meditation technique, a form of meditation used to control the minds and bodies of other people. He told me he believed that he had used his technique once to seduce a woman at a party. This is when I understood his reputation. I simply nodded and laughed occasionally when he went off on these rants. I knew one day I would reach a saturation point for this absurdity, but I could probably endure a week more. A couple days later, we were eating lunch with one of the gurus. I was telling Michael about my trip to the giant field where the branch Davidian used to be. He wasn't sure what the branch Davidian was, so I explained to him about Waco, David Koresh, and the botched siege by the FBI and ATF that led to the death of 76 Davidians and 4 ATF agents. He was enraged. The government is always trying to silence people preaching the truth. That's so fucked up. I want to explain to him that David Koresh was a sociopathic cult leader, interested in power and nothing else, but he wasn't having it. Now I was angry. He was having a tantrum about a subject, and I just explained to him, and now he's telling me I'm wrong, and that cult leader was right. This is when I saw the truly insane Michael. He was spitting, red as a beet, pacing back and forth. I left the table and got back to work, but he followed me. After half an hour of this absurd argument, I couldn't handle it anymore. I'm not having this conversation with a fucking loon, Michael. How can I expect logic from you? You came here to get superpowers. The look in his eyes changed from anger to hatred. He got real still and went at me. Michael was a big guy, much bigger than me. He lunged at me and, to be honest, I ran. As I ran, I went through my pocket praying I grabbed a knife before I left my cabin. I know it sounds ridiculous, but you don't walk around my old neighborhood without some sort of protection. Plus, it was a pretty useful tool on the farm. Luckily, I had grabbed it and turned around so he saw it. He stopped and contemplated for 3 seconds. He quickly turned around and finished his lunch. The next day, and pulled the temple president aside and explained what happened, and that we had to get rid of him. It didn't take much convincing. No one really cared for him, and he wasn't much help on the farm. I felt bad snitching on the guy. He was in a pretty desperate situation. He had no car, no money, and I can't imagine he had many friends. The temple president also informed me that he had been an alcoholic for 10 years and had come here to get sober. I found it very strange he never told me this. Later that day, I saw through my window someone drive up and hand him several suitcases to pack what little he had. I saw them both drive off to God knows where. Weeks went by and the whole encounter kind of faded from my conscious. Late one night I got a text. "Hey, this is Michael. We can get my car out for $280. Want to go traveling?" I never responded. I wasn't sure how he got my number, but I figured he looked me up on Facebook or something. A few nights later, I was in the temple office using the Wi-Fi to make some emails. I was making the walk back to my cabin, and from the pitch black, I heard a lot of loud banging coming from a barn. I remember thinking must be an animal, but also thinking it must be a pretty big one to make that much noise. I entered my cabin. The actual door to the cabin doesn't have a lock, but my bedroom did, so I used that one. I was pretty unsettled by the banging, but I figured my imagination was getting the best of me. Later that night, I woke up needing to take a piss. The cabin didn't have a bathroom, but we had a shared outhouse. I didn't feel like putting on shoes and walking around in the dark, so I figured I'd just piss in the sink. I know it's gross, but I'm the only one who uses that kitchen. I opened my bedroom door and nearly pissed myself right there. Michael, completely naked, was crouching in a corner of my kitchen facing the wall. I made a noise I wasn't aware I could make. Something you would only hear Shaggy make on Scooby-Doo. This noise alerted Michael to my entrance. All he did was glare at me and shook his whole body. I slammed my door and locked it almost immediately. I knew what he was trying to do. He was trying to pacify me with his meditation technique. I called 911. I, in the end, didn't even open my door, or didn't even dare to go over and approach it until I saw the red and blue lights outside my window. Michael wasn't there when they arrived. My guess is that he ran deep into the woods that surrounded the farm. I explained me and Michael's history and what had happened that night. There wasn't much they could do since no one seemed to know anything about Michael. I didn't even know his last name. I had to leave the farm shortly after. Calling the police was really frowned upon, since I believe many of the old hippies thought they were still avoiding the draft. I didn't mind leaving either. I couldn't sleep, knowing Michael might be out in those woods, angrier than he was before. I stayed up almost 3 days while I waited for my friends to come pick me up. If you feel this was too long and could easily be abridged, let me know. I've just been looking to tell this story for a while. Field trip bus ride. This is my first post, so bear with me. This happened when I was in first grade, so 6 or 7 years old. I'm now in my mid-20s, just for context. Every year, the first graders take a trip to the zoo, about an hour away from our tiny town. I was a little shy girl, so I spent most of the bus ride staring out the window, While the other kids were busy conversing with each other, a Jeep pulls out where I can have a clear look into the vehicle and at the driver. We were on the interstate. I see him playing with something under his shirt, all the while looking at me and then back at the road, back at me and so forth. One hand on the wheel, and the other fiddling with whatever was under his shirt. I couldn't keep my eyes off him, fascinated with what the hell he was hiding. Then he lifted up his shirt and yup, I got a good look at what he was playing with the whole time. He frickin' waved it at me. Granted, I was a little girl, and had never seen one before, nor did I understand why he was doing what he was doing. A girl that was near me asked what I was looking at, and then she got to see for herself. She started hollering, and I swear to God, all the kids on the bus ran to the windows to see what was going on. The Jeep gunned off, and I'm sure it got off the next exit. I remember telling my mom about it when I got home, but then I just sort of blocked it out of my mind. It was only several years later, when I had 2 daughters of my own, that I recalled this event. Just last night, I was talking to my mom about it, wishing that I had been more mature and thought to get his license plate number or something. All I remember is a Jeep or SUV of some type, and that it was a middle-aged white guy. So, creepy dude that thinks masturbating next to a school bus full of young children is acceptable. I hope to never meet you again.